I caught my husband marrying another woman, and then I did the unthinkable. My name is Olivia Carter, and I'm 38 years old. I live just outside Boston in a stone-front colonial home that I bought with my own money, long before I met Daniel. I've spent most of my adult life building a portfolio of real estate properties, running a small chain of interior design studios, and investing in a few boutique hotels in Cape Cod. I never imagined my success would one day attract the wrong kind of love. It was a Saturday morning in late spring when Daniel's text came through. "Hey Liv, got called away for a last-minute business meeting in New York. Back Sunday night. Love you." On the surface, it sounded perfectly ordinary. Daniel worked in consulting, a vague job title I'd long stopped asking too many questions about because I was busy with my own ventures. But the moment I read his text, something in me shifted. His choice of words, the overly neat explanation, the lack of his usual playful sign-off, it all felt off. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. After all, marriage is built on trust, right? I made coffee, sat by the kitchen window, and scrolled through design blogs on my laptop, trying to push the uneasy feeling aside. But what if that gut feeling was right, and the truth was more shocking than you could ever imagine? 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Rachel Morgan, my closest friend since college. She's one of those people who can talk you down from any ledge. But the tremor in her voice told me she wasn't calling to soothe me. "Olivia, please tell me Daniel has a twin brother I've never met," she began. I laughed, confused. "No, why?" she exhaled sharply. "Because I'm decorating a wedding venue in Providence right now, and the groom, Olivia, he is Daniel. I swear it on my life." I froze. My coffee mug hovered halfway to my lips. "You're sure? 100%. He's wearing a navy tux, hair slicked back, smiling like a man who just won the lottery. And the bride, blonde, mid-20s, cheap crystal tiara, white lace gown." My pulse pounded in my ears. "What time's the ceremony?" 2 o'clock. The guests are already here." I stared at the granite countertop, trying to process what she'd just told me. Daniel hadn't gone to New York. He was 45 minutes away in Providence, standing at an altar with another woman. My mind flicked through every late night he came home from work, every unexplained weekend trip. Rachel lowered her voice. "Liv, what are you going to do?" For a moment, I didn't know. My first instinct was to drive straight there and drag him out by his collar in front of everyone. But another part of me, the colder, more calculating side, told me to be still, gather proof, strike when it hurts the most. I forced my voice steady. "Thank you, Ratch. Don't let him see you." "I'll handle it." After we hung up, I sat in silence. I thought about the man I'd married 6 years ago, the charming widower who'd swept me off my feet with romantic weekends in Vermont, dinners at five-star restaurants, and whispered promises of forever. I thought about the wedding vows we'd exchanged on a breezy September afternoon in Martha's Vineyard. And I thought about the prenup he'd resisted signing until I insisted. I owned everything: the house we lived in, the vacation property in Maine, the cars, the studio spaces, the hotels, all in my name. Back then, I told myself it was just business sense. Now I was starting to see it might have been my saving grace. The clock read 12:47 p.m. I had just over an hour before Daniel would be at the altar. My mind was no longer clouded by disbelief. It was sharp, clear, focused. If what Rachel said was true, Daniel wasn't just cheating. He was committing bigamy, likely with the intent to get his hands on my assets. The betrayal burned hot in my chest, but underneath it was something colder, more dangerous: resolve. I walked upstairs, opened my wardrobe, and pulled out a simple navy dress. Not too flashy, not too plain. I didn't want to stand out if I decided to go to that venue. I slipped on low heels, tied my hair back, and grabbed my smallest handbag. Inside, I placed my phone, my spare car keys, and the small voice recorder I sometimes used for business meetings. Back in the kitchen, I sat at the counter and stared at the wall clock. The seconds seemed to tick louder than usual. I could feel my heartbeat. I in Chinese letter, Japanese letter throat, but I wasn't shaking. I was ready. If Daniel thought he could play me for a fool, he had no idea who he was married to. I decided I wasn't going to storm into that church and create a spectacle. Not yet. If Daniel was willing to gamble his entire marriage for this woman, then he was playing a much bigger game than I'd realized. I needed to understand exactly what he was after before I made my move. I spent the next half hour digging. I logged into my personal laptop, the one Daniel never used, and opened the folder where I kept every scanned document related to our assets. The properties in my name, the business accounts, the investments, my prenup copy. It all reassured me of one thing. If Daniel had been plotting to take anything from me, he was going to fail. But I also knew men like him rarely did something this reckless without a grand plan. I called Rachel back. "Do you recognize anyone else there?" I asked. She hesitated. "A few people look like they're from his office, and one man I've seen at your parties, tall, gray hair, expensive watch." I clenched my jaw. That would be Richard Bell, an old acquaintance of Daniel's who'd once suggested he expand his financial influence by getting more involved in my business ventures. I politely shut it down. Now, I wondered if this wedding was the backup plan. By 1:40 p.m., I decided I would go to the venue, not to stop the wedding but to see it with my own eyes, to witness the kind of man Daniel really was when he thought I wasn't looking. Providence wasn't far. I drove in silence, my hands steady on the steering wheel. The recorder in my bag switched on just in case. The late spring sunlight filtered through the trees as I exited the highway, but it felt like a cruel joke, too bright, too warm for a day like this. The church came into view, a stone building with a steep roof, surrounded by blooming tulips and white ribbons tied to the gate. Cars lined the street, sleek black sedans and shiny SUVs. I parked half a block away, smoothed my dress and walked toward the entrance. The heavy wooden doors were propped open. I slipped in quietly, staying close to the side aisle where the shadows were deeper. My eyes swept over the crowd, guests in pastel dresses and crisp suits, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. And there, at the far end of the aisle, under an arch of white roses, was Daniel. He was laughing with the officiant, holding hands with a tall blonde in a fitted lace gown. Her smile was wide, but her eyes flicked around the room like she was afraid of something. It took everything in me to stay hidden. I moved behind a pillar where I had a clear line of sight but was shielded from view. I watched him lean toward her, whispering something that made her giggle and squeeze his hand. Every nerve in my body screamed to walk down that aisle and end it. But I forced myself to stand still. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about strategy. I needed to know who was in the pews, who they were connected to, and what exactly Daniel thought he was going to gain from this. Then I overheard it, a conversation between two men sitting nearby. "So once it's official, he'll have joint rights to Olivia's properties, right?" one said in a low voice. "Yeah, that's the idea," the other replied. "She's worth millions. He'll transfer everything over before she even knows what's happening." My stomach turned to ice. So that was it. Daniel wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was orchestrating a financial ambush. The marriage to this woman wasn't about love. It was a step in a con game. I took a slow, steady breath and memorized the faces of the two men. Then I turned my gaze back to Daniel, committing the entire scene to memory. The smug tilt of his chin, the pride in his posture, the way he held that woman's hand like it was some prize. And then, as if fate wanted to test my control, his eyes lifted and met mine. For a split second the world went silent. His smile faltered. Confusion flickered, then fear. He knew he'd been caught. I didn't move. I just stared at him, letting the truth settle into his bones. Then I turned and walked out of the church, the recorder still running in my bag, my heels clicking against the polished floor. By the time I reached my car, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even sad. I was ready. Daniel thought he was the one pulling the strings, but he was about to learn what it felt like to be on the other end of the game. I drove home in silence, the afternoon sun glinting off the windshield like nothing in the world had changed, except everything had. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I replayed that look on Daniel's face, that split second of pure panic when he saw me standing there. He knew he'd been exposed. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same: manicured lawn, white shutters, flower beds I'd planted myself in early spring. It was almost insulting that the world could look so normal when my marriage had just been gutted like a fish. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the couch, elbows resting on my knees. I wasn't crying. The tears had dried up somewhere between the church pew and my car. What I felt now was something heavier, not sadness, not rage, something sharper, colder. 6 years. That's how long I'd been with Daniel. 6 years of shared dinners, weekend getaways, anniversaries marked by expensive gifts and handwritten cards. I'd loved him with a loyalty I didn't hand out easily. I wasn't naive. I knew people could be flawed, selfish, even cruel at times. But I never imagined the man I married would stand at another altar while still wearing my ring. Worse than the betrayal was the realization that I had probably never known him at all. All those nights he stayed late at the office, the business trips that popped up without warning, I chalked them up to the demands of his career. I hadn't seen the cracks forming because I was too busy filling them with my own trust. I thought of Chloe, her white lace dress, the way she clung to his arm. Did she even know the kind of man she was marrying? Or was she in on the plan, a willing partner in the scheme to strip me of everything I'd built? The conversation I overheard in the church replayed in my mind. She's worth millions. Transfer everything before she even knows. My jaw ached from clenching it. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. If they thought I was going to be some oblivious, broken wife crying into a pillow while they lived it up on my dime, they were about to be gravely disappointed. I walked into my office, a converted sunroom with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a desk I'd imported from Italy. On the top shelf was a small lockbox where I kept duplicates of key documents, the business licenses, a certified copy of my prenuptial agreement, everything that proved my ownership. I sat at my desk, flicking through each page, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the polished wood. My legal ties to these assets were airtight. Daniel could charm, lie, and scheme all he wanted, but without my consent, he couldn't touch a cent. Still, I knew he wouldn't give up easily. Men like Daniel didn't slink away quietly. They doubled down, tried to twist the narrative, make you look like the unreasonable one. He'd come back, probably with that smug, "you misunderstood" act, and expect me to fold. Not this time. I closed the lockbox, slid it back onto the shelf, and sat quietly for a few minutes. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, the occasional chirp of a bird in the garden, but inside my mind was a chessboard. Every piece had to be moved with precision. I thought about what would hurt Daniel the most: not shouting, not public humiliation. Those would sting for a moment, but they wouldn't leave a lasting scar. No, the real wound would come from stripping away the very thing he was after. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Are you okay?" I typed back, "I will be, just trust me," and I meant it. I wasn't okay in this moment, but I would be, because now I had a plan, and unlike Daniel, I didn't need to lie to win. I stood and walked into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. The coolness steadied me. In the distance, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of golden rose. Somewhere, Daniel was playing the devote groom, but that image was going to crumble faster than he could imagine. When I went upstairs, I didn't bother turning on the bedroom light. I changed into comfortable clothes, pulled my hair into a bun, and sat cross-legged on the bed with my laptop. This wasn't just about defending my assets anymore. This was about reclaiming control over my life. I opened a blank document and started typing names, dates, connections. Everyone at that wedding who might have known about the scheme, every suspicious incident from the past year, every inconsistency in Daniel's stories. This wasn't just a reaction. It was evidence building. As the list grew longer, I realized something. The shock had worn off. The heartbreak had hardened into resolve. And when he finally walked back into this house, thinking he could smooth-talk his way out of it, he wouldn't be met by the trusting wife he'd left behind that morning. He'd be met by someone who had already made up her mind. I woke early the next morning, long before the sun crept over the rooftops. The house was silent, the kind of silence that lets you hear your own breath in. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a robe, and padded down to my office. Today wasn't going to be about emotions. Today was going to be about action. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Jonathan Reed. Jonathan had been with me since I bought my first property at 25, and he drafted the prenup Daniel had tried to wiggle out of Signan. He picked up on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Olivia, is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said. "I need to secure every asset I own, immediately." He didn't press for details, not yet. "I'll draft the necessary freezes and notifications." "You want me to send copies to the bank managers as well?" "Yes. And Jonathan, make sure Daniel Carter's name is nowhere near any account access, not even as a beneficiary." "Understood," he said, his tone shifting to that crisp professionalism I trusted. "I'll have everything filed by noon." After hanging up, I started logging into my accounts one by one: business accounts, personal savings, investment portfolios. I changed every password, updated every security question, even switched out my two-factor authentication to a different phone number Daniel didn't know about. Next, I called my property manager and told her to change the locks on every rental and vacation home under my name. I didn't care if it cost me a small fortune in locksmith fees. Peace of mind was priceless. By 9 a.m., the financial fortress was in place. Daniel could come back from his little wedding to find a locked house, but he'd soon realize that wasn't the only door closed to him. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen island, going over the events of yesterday. I'd replayed that conversation between the two men in the pews more times than I could count. "She's worth millions. Transfer everything before she even knows." They didn't just underestimate me. They dismissed me entirely. To them, I was a mark, the rich wife who'd be too emotional to think straight. They had no idea my calm was their warning. Around noon, I got an email from Jonathan confirming that all legal actions had been taken. "Everything is locked down. He has no claim and no access," the note read. A small smile tugged at my lips for the first time in 24 hours. Then I took it a step further. I called the dealership and arranged for the luxury SUV Daniel loved to be collected immediately. It was registered in my name. I rang the marina and canceled the summer slip rental for the boat he bragged about to his friends. I even had the staff at the Cape Cod property instructed to deny entry to anyone not on a pre-approved list, which now consisted of exactly one name: mine. By mid-afternoon, the pieces were all in place. I didn't need to confront him in a fit of rage. I didn't need to scream or demand answers. My silence would be the blade. I imagined him pulling into the driveway later, perhaps with Chloe beside him, expecting to waltz into my home and start his new life. I pictured the look on his face when his key didn't turn in the lock, when he opened his banking app and saw zeros where there should have been six figures. That evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine, I got a text from Rachel. "Any news?" I replied. "Not yet, but when it comes, it'll be worth the wait." I carried my wine to the patio, the spring air cool against my skin. Somewhere out there, Daniel was still celebrating his new marriage, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already been pulled away. And I realized I didn't even need to see him fall. Knowing it was common was enough. Tomorrow, reality would meet him at the door. It was early evening when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't get up. I stayed seated in the living room armchair, legs crossed, a book open on my lap, though I wasn't reading it. Through the bay window, I saw him step out of the SUV, Chloe right behind him in a cream trench coat, oversized sunglasses covering half her face. Daniel walked up to the front door with that familiar confident stride, but it faltered almost immediately. He slid his key into the lock, tried turning it and stopped, tried again, nothing. He turned to Chloe muttering something, then rang the bell. I didn't move. He rang again, this time longer. Then came the knocking, first polite, then harder, louder. Finally, I heard his voice. "Olivia, open the door. This isn't funny." I waited a beat, then got up and opened it just enough to lean against the frame. I didn't smile. "Even in, Daniel, Mrs. Carter, is it?" My eyes flicked to Chloe, his face drained of color. "Olivia, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I said smoothly. "Unfortunately, I'm not interested." He glanced past me into the house. "What the hell happened to my account, my cards? The car, they were never yours," I interrupted. "Everything you touched was mine before I met you, Daniel. You thought you could marry her, transfer my assets, and walk away rich." I tilted my head. "Poor planning." Chloe stepped forward, her voice sharp. "We don't need your money." I let out a soft laugh. "Then you'll be fine without it. Best of luck with that." I closed the door before either of them could respond. The knock-in returned, but after a few minutes it stopped. Through the window, I watched them walk back to the SUV, or rather, what they thought was theirs. A tow truck pulled up at the end of the drive, the dealership logo clear on the side. The driver didn't even glance at them as he hooked the car and drove it away. That night must have been the beginning of their downfall. Within a week, Rachel heard from a mutual acquaintance that Daniel and Chloe were renting a small apartment on the edge of town. Gone were the designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the weekends in Cape Cod. Daniel's consultant work dried up. His network had been built through me, and without that connection, doors closed fast. I didn't hear from him directly, but word traveled. They were behind on rent. Within 2 months, Chloe was spotted working shifts at a local bar. Daniel took a job selling cars, which might have been poetic if it weren't so pathetic. Meanwhile, I lived my life exactly as before, running my business, traveling when I wanted, enjoying my home in peace. I never felt the urge to check on them, never needed to see the look on his face again. The satisfaction came from knowing that the life he'd imagined, built on my back, had crumbled into dust. One evening over dinner with Rachel, she leaned in and asked, "Don't you ever feel like you should have confronted him more, really let him have it?" I shook my head. "Why? He's already living the confrontation every single day." She smiled, raising her glass. "To patience." "To patience," I agreed, clinking her glass with mine. "Because here's the thing, people like Daniel think they're clever. They think love makes you blind, that trust makes you weak. But love isn't weakness, and trust doesn't erase the ability to act. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dramatic scene or a shouting match. It's watching them choke on the consequences of their own greed." And from where I was sitting, Daniel and Chloe were already gasping. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Betrayal has a way of making you feel small, like the ground has vanished beneath your feet. But the truth is, you're not powerless unless you hand over that power. When someone shows you they're willing to use you, believe them. Don't waste your energy trying to make them see your worth. They already know it, and that's why they targeted you in the first place. Protect what's yours, move with intention, and let time do the rest. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't fight to keep someone who was already halfway out the door. I chose dignity over drama, strategy over impulse. And in the end, that choice cost Daniel far more than any confrontation ever could. So, to anyone listening who's been lied to, cheated on, or underestimated, remember this. You don't have to burn yourself to the ground to teach someone a lesson. Sometimes, the quietest exit is the loudest message. This is Olivia Carter. And that's how I caught my husband marrying another woman and did the unthinkable.